All right, well, welcome everyone to the Duke Center for Misophonia and Emotion Regulation 2024 Year in Review. This is a part of our webinar series. That's a quarterly webinar we do each year, and we've been doing for now, this will be our 8th year doing these. So welcome, it's great to have you here. We are gonna talk some about what happened in the last year in the world of misophonia and talk about some of what we think are important advancements. Before we do that, just a couple of really quick reminders. If you've been to these webinars before, you've heard me say this before. We are really dedicated to trying to create a space here where people can be able to learn and attend as best as possible. And so we ask everyone to stay muted, and we will do everything we can to try to minimize any triggers or any distractions on our end. If we do unintentionally do anything to elicit a type of trigger, we apologize in advance. We are very sensitive to such things, as you might imagine, and we'll do our best. So we are going to get into the meat of the conversation today, but before we do, I want to acknowledge a couple of really important partners in the work that we do here at Duke, with Dr. Jennifer Brout and Cris Edwards, both of whom are here today and helping to support this webinar through the moderation function. So thank you to Jen and to Cris for everything you do, and with us at Duke and outside of us. Everybody who's here to listen and to learn and participate, you're welcome throughout this whole webinar to type in any comments or questions you have in the Zoom chat. And Cris or Jen or people from my team who are here will answer your questions as best as possible. And when we finish with the presentation, we'll stop the recording and we will then have a discussion with whatever time is left. Thanks again to everybody who has helped with this webinar series. I especially want to thank our patients and loved ones who've shared with us their lived experiences over the last year. Our scientific colleagues and collaborators all around the world who are helping us and helping each other to really further knowledge about misophonia, and to the curious and open-minded clinicians who have really been interested in trying to figure out what to do and in some cases what not to do when helping people with misophonia. So thank you to all of you. Some of you, I see your names, you are here today, and it's wonderful that you're here supporting your ongoing learning in this space. I'm also going to give a shout out to our department and our School of Medicine for allowing us and supporting us to be the resource we are for the misophonia community. To my team, and in particular to Grace, who is here with us, Grace Heppes, who's our outreach and education coordinator, and who is really just an extraordinary addition to our team in the last year, who came to us through funding from the Brown family specifically. So thank you to the Brown family and to all of the families, all of the many anonymous families who give us $20 or $100 or $1,000 or whatever the amount is, small or large. We literally just wouldn't be here without you, so thank you. Our mission here is to understand the causes of misophonia and to develop treatments for it. And lots of times people ask us how they can support us. And so we just wanted to share some ways that if you are interested, you can follow us. If you're an Instagram person, just hop on and follow us at Duke Center for Misophonia. If you like watching videos on YouTube, you have a YouTube channel at Duke CMER. You can share our website with people to just kind of raise awareness. You can email us if you have questions, if you want to collaborate. I am not always personally the best at responding to emails, and I apologize in advance to that if I don't respond right away. If I don't, please just feel free to reach right back out to me whenever, and we'll continue our conversation. If you're somebody who wants to give financially, here's how you do that. You can go to our website and you can click on the Give icon at the top right of the screen, and it will just bring you to another screen that says, where do you want to contribute? And you can just type in misophonia. Everything we get from people, big and small, supports our research, our awareness, and our advocacy efforts. That's what we use the money for, and we really are grateful. Okay, so that's how you can support us. Now, let's transition into thinking about this last year. And I wanted to start by thinking about how far we've come. So when we first did this webinar in 2017, the first one that, Jen, you remember we did, Lisa, who I think may not be with us right now, but may join us later, she would remember. At the time, things were really, really different. And this community has come leaps and bounds in the last 7+ years. So looking back, there literally was no definition accepted by anybody for what misophonia was 7 years ago. And there were no validated measurement tools. In other words, there was no validated way of determining what misophonia was or how many symptoms somebody had or how impaired they were. There literally was nothing that was of any real rigor scientifically. There was no evidence of any prevalence estimate. All we had were wildly speculative estimates with college student samples. And if you've been in the field for a while, you remember these studies and you remember these estimates, and they've been totally replaced by newer, much more rigorous prevalence estimates. We knew nothing to very little scientifically about the mental health and the audiologic problems that come with misophonia. Lots of just like speculation and single case studies where a single person was talked about, which is interesting, but of course doesn't really represent all people with misophonia. There were no clinical trials that had been done, and there was not a single funding source to do any science. Think about that. That is a lot on the screen. All of those things have changed. Every one of those things has changed in these last 7 years. We have a consensus definition. It's imperfect, that's true, but we have one. We have one. It's the Sweeto et al. Paper. We have a number of measurement tools that are validated. There's actually so many now that it's a little bit complicated to know which one to use and why. But that's a better problem to have than not having any at all, I would argue. We have pretty good prevalence estimates, which I'm going to talk about some of this stuff in detail in a little bit. We have some really pretty good prevalence estimates now that we never had before. We know from rigorously done studies which mental health and which hearing problems seem to be more associated with misophonia. This is not conclusive, but we know a lot more than we used to. There are ongoing clinical trials. There's a couple of past clinical trials. Again, we don't have a treatment that is the single specific treatment for all people. That doesn't exist. By the way, that doesn't exist for almost anything either, right? But that doesn't certainly exist for misophonia yet. We do have some clinical trials pointing us in the right direction. And then lastly on this slide, the Misophonia Research Fund, compared to 2017, it actually exists through the generosity of the Ream Foundation and the Miller family. We have an annual funding source for scientific investigators all around the world to compete for really highly coveted, very generous annual grants to be able to do really good science to understand what misophonia is, it isn't, and then how we can help people with it. So this is just tremendous. And I wanted to give Misophonia Research Fund a real solid shout out. If you're a person who wants to do this, you can do this. If you're a person who wants to hit the emojis, the clap emoji, please do that. Misophonia Research Fund is really just doing tremendous, tremendous, generous work to advance understanding of all of this that we're talking about today. And if you don't know anything about them, go to their website and check them out. It's a terrific organization doing really, really life-changing work. Okay, so now let's transition to talking about 10 advancements that we think are pretty good, big advancements in 2024. Now, how do we come to these? This is not scientific. This is not perfect. I'm sure we overlooked a number of different things that were arguably also really big advancements. So if there's something missing from this top 10 list, feel free to just say so in the chat. Just share with everybody else something else that you think has been a really big advancement. We'd love to hear from you. We did on our Instagram channel, Grace posted a query maybe a few weeks back to kind of hear what people were thinking were some of the most important advancements. And so we did get some input from some people. But what we've got here are what we think are important advancements in the field, scientifically and clinically, and in the space of advocacy. So without further ado, let's jump in and let's talk about some of the advancements. So the first thing to orient you to is that last year we had second annual Conversations about Research for Everyone with Misophonia Day, also known as CARE Day. And so CARE Day is a day-long free event online where we bring researchers together who have published in the last year important research on misophonia. And they present their research to the public, including a wide variety of people, clinicians, researchers, but mostly it's people with misophonia and their family members. And so the idea behind CARE Day is to make the research matter to the public, to make the research be something that's kind of out there for all to have a conversation about, and not just something that researchers are doing and publishing. We're proud to be co-hosts of CARE Day and appreciate everybody who has participated in it as speakers and as participants. Number 9 is the Misophonia podcast, who probably most of you know about. And if you don't, we highly recommend that you check out the Misophonia podcast. This is the first, and I think the only, and certainly the best, podcast that provides misophonia-based advocacy and information. And this past year, Misophonia podcast went past their 200th episode. And so we wanted to recognize and thank Adil Ahmad and the folks who run the Misophonia podcast for their work and their contributions. People routinely tell us how validating it feels when they listen to these podcasts. If you're a clinician here, you can refer your patients to listen to the podcast. What Adil does most episodes is he has really open conversations with people who have misophonia so that they can talk about their experience. And it's not scientific, it's not intended to be, it's really a very qualitative, very rich, very sort of deep way to understand people's lived experiences. So congratulations, Adil, on getting to your 200th episode, and keep up the good work. It's really changing lives. Okay, number 8 is that in the last year, there's been a number of research studies that have started to give us much better clarity than in the previous years about what's going on with hearing processes in misophonia. You think about it, misophonia is a condition that certainly involves hearing. By definition, the sounds that are coming into the person's brain are a big part of what's going on with their reaction to the sounds. We've known for a few years that misophonia is not just a problem of sound sensitivity, but at the same time, we also haven't really understood how hearing processes might relate to misophonia. And it's complicated. It's complicated. These are not easy studies to do. But we wanted to highlight that there are now in the last year have been an increasing number of studies pointing to some of the audiologic characteristics of people with misophonia. And you can see we've bold-faced a couple of the takeaway points, just as examples. This is not a comprehensive, thorough, every single study. This slide is not intended to do that. It's really just intended to give you some direction if this is something you're interested in learning about. And you can see that studies are showing that most people seem to have normal hearing sensitivity from a peripheral perspective. But what we are starting to see is that the difficulties at a hearing level are not in the ear necessarily, but they might be more at the cortical level where sound is processed in the brain. Right? So audiologic measures sometimes just measure what's happening directly in the ear, but they also can measure what's happening more in a more widespread way or in a more targeted way at certain parts in the brain. And that's where the research is pointing more and more that that's maybe where we're seeing the dysfunction in the brain in misophonia, or at least part of what we're seeing in the brain. It's where sound, it may be where sound is processed at a cortical level. Now, it's tempting to think, oh, that must be the spot in the brain. Don't think that way. That's not the way the brain works. That's not the way anybody who does any real kind of thinking about brains, that's just not how anybody thinks. The brain is complicated, and so there's systems, there's networks, there's circuits. Lots of things interact with lots of things. It's more like a network of related parts that impact each other. It's not like just one spot in the brain is the spot that lights up for people with misophonia. It's probably much more complicated. But certainly the cortical, some of the sound parts of the cortical areas of the brain might be part of that network. And that's important. It's important for us to understand what's going on in the brains of people with misophonia. And we have to look at sound and sound processing as part of this. So congratulations to our colleagues here on the screen, and to all of our colleagues and all of the scientists who are doing this work. Please keep doing it. We need to understand this. Number 7 is new biopsychosocial treatment targets have been identified in the last year. This is a busy slide, so let's kind of walk through it. What do I mean by biopsychosocial? I really just simply mean, it's a big word, but really all I mean is that misophonia, like lots of other kinds of conditions, may have different parts that account for it, and that we as clinicians can try to change. So treatment target just means a thing we might try to change in a treatment. And if we change that thing, that process, maybe it will change people's impairment, maybe it will change their symptoms, maybe it will change and improve their functioning. So we have to know, what are we trying to treat exactly? Now, obviously it's a whole person, but that whole person has biological, psychological, and social processes that might be relevant. So science in this last year has thought about things like this, and a lot of different researchers are now doing different things to try to figure out what are the most relevant biological, psychological, social treatment targets. You can see a list, and I've underlined to try to make it really digestible for you. If you're a clinician who's here, you can see here are, potential treatment targets for you to think about, especially if you are somebody who has a clinical license to target these kinds of treatment targets, right? So let's look at these. So people with misophonia might be more aware of the stimuli in their environment. So this Murphy study, they basically were able to show that people with misophonia at a level of attention in their brain are more likely to be aware of particular nuances in the stimuli around them, not just to misophonia stimuli, but to stimuli. So there might be this sort of enhanced attentional vigilance towards the environment, and that might be more of a vulnerability factor for people with misophonia for obvious reasons. If you're more generally attending to nuances in your environment, if those attentional kind of antennae in your brain are really tuned in, you're likely to pick up on certain things much more than other people. You're more likely to pick up on things that are aversive, unpleasant, unpredictable, uncontrollable, right? Threat related, right? Because that's how brains work. That is, at the end of the day, what our brain is about, right? It's about keeping us alive. And how does it do that? It's got these sophisticated detection systems to understand consciously and unconsciously what in the world is going on around us. The Murphy study shows people with misophonia might have some of these kind of enhanced attentional systems. That tells us, in terms of treatment, focusing on attention and awareness and helping people attune to their environments effectively with their attention, with intention, might be a really useful thing to consider. Okay, so just going into that one a little bit of detail, I won't do that with all of these, but I will sort of just highlight here quickly In the Guetta et al. Study done here at Duke, we found that the experience of daily stress predicts how severe misophonia is, more so than past history of traumatic stress, more so than PTSD. We actually didn't find a whole lot of evidence that PTSD is a fundamentally important part of misophonia severity. We didn't find that lifetime stressors were a particularly important part. We did find that everyday experiences of stress really seem to make things worse. So again, what does that tell us? It tells us on this slide that we have the ability now to say in treatment, we might want to be targeting stress, perceived stress. And the good news there is there's lots and lots of evidence-based ways to help people reduce perceived stress. And we don't have to wait, I would argue, we don't have to wait 10 years and 20 years and 30 years to develop a new treatment for stress for misophonia. We already have them. We can use what we have right now to help people. Dr. Dixon's study, the next one, looked at a national sample level, representative across the US, largest study ever done on misophonia, and found emotion dysregulation, difficulties regulating emotions, is significantly associated with how impaired somebody is with misophonia. This tells us, again, in terms of looking for treatments, if you're a parent, for example, and you're thinking, I want to find a good treatment, this tells you you might consider people who are using evidence-based treatment approaches to help change emotion dysregulation. It's just a consideration, right? We now have a little bit more of a sense of what to be targeting in treatment. The Bagrowska study found that thoughts that are kind of like what we might think of as paranoia-like thoughts, those increase when someone is exposed to their triggers. Okay, that's a study that shows what a lot of us know clinically we see and people tell us. But now there's a study that points that. What does that tell us? It tells us we need to help people with cognition. We have to help them understand what they're thinking and how to make sense of what they're thinking in a way that helps keep them grounded and helps keep them functioning better. Misophonia, also from a social cognition perspective, has been written about in the last year. A couple of people we highlight on the screen have written about this. The idea here is that social and cognitive judgments, in other words, the way people with misophonia make sense of others when they're triggered, that might be also a really important biopsychosocial treatment target. In this case, maybe more a social treatment target to focus in on, helping people make thoughtful and balanced social judgments when they're triggered. Because again, we know that misophonia, scientifically speaking, is not something that is specific to sounds. It's really likely to be something related to how somebody experiences sounds in context. Context is often social, right? It's often somebody else is triggering. So if someone's triggering you, your brain automatically, whether you like it or not, it's wired to make a judgment of what's happening, right? To make an appraisal. And these studies this last year are paving the way to help us understand how we might help people target changing those things, if those are relevant to that person that we're treating. Big picture on this slide, it tells us that there isn't one simple, specific treatment target, right? You clinicians listening, you're seeing this, right? You're seeing that this means that when we're treating somebody with misophonia, we have to think about the whole person. And we have to identify for that individual patient which biopsychosocial processes are most important for them. Not because a study said so, but because you've carefully, individually assessed for that person which among these and other transdiagnostic processes seem like they're causing the impairment for that patient. So this last year gave us a lot more information to help parents and patients know what kind of interventions might help them. Okay. None of these relate to just doing talk therapy where you go in and you just talk. Now, that's not to say that can't be helpful, but it is to say none of these studies suggest that just by talking in an unstructured way about anything and feeling supported, that that's going to be helpful. Again, it might be. We haven't done a study on that, but these studies suggest there might be some specific biopsychosocial things to change.
Zach,
That's what we aim for. Yes, Jen.
sorry if I may interrupt you. I just wanted to add that it's important for people to know that some of these attentional processes, some of these biological processes are not within conscious control.
Right.
And I just think that's an important distinction to make in terms of reactivity and change.
Totally. Thank you, Jen. This is not all stuff people are aware of in the moment, nor is it stuff that's like easy to change. It's just all things to consider to try to help people become more aware of, to figure out which things we might want to help them change to improve their lives. Okay, so I've hammered on this slide quite a bit, probably because I'm a clinician and a researcher, and I live with someone with misophonia. So I think about, like, I just think all the time, what can we do to try to help? And I think this is a smart direction to think in this very kind of individualized way. Okay, coming in at number 6, speaking of treatment, there were a few treatment studies in the last year. None of them give us a perfect answer about the specific treatment, but collectively they do give us important information. Think of these as like puzzle pieces in a puzzle. Any one study is just one puzzle piece. It's not the whole puzzle, but it is an important puzzle piece to kind of tell us what seems like might be worth considering, right? No final answers, but you can see some of these treatment approaches starting to show like there might be potential directions to take, at least for some people. Maybe not everybody, right? We just got through talking about lots of individual differences and ways to think about what to change in treatment, what processes to change. So these approaches here on this screen, they wouldn't be for everybody in my mind, but they might be helpful for some people. So CBT-based approaches, think of CBT, if you're not familiar with this, think of CBT is not a thing, it's really a type of things. Okay, so think of it like you think of your car. If you have a car, you have a brand. You might have a Ford, you might have a Toyota, you might have a whatever, right? That's the brand of the car. That's kind of like what CBT is. You might have a particular type of Ford or a particular type of Toyota, right? You might have a RAV4 or a Sequoia or a 4Runner or a Toyota Tacoma, right? You might have a very particular make and model. But what you have is a Toyota in that example. So CBT is like Toyota, and then there's specific interventions, specific brands and types of CBTs, like there's specific makes and models of Toyotas or any car. You can kind of think of things that way. So in the second bullet, you can see the unified protocol is just a type of CBT, right? It's just a Toyota Tundra, in my example. There are lots of CBTs. There's lots of psychotherapies. So in this analogy, psychotherapy would be sort of like car. Treatment would be sort of like vehicle, right? If you're following the analogy, they're just like ways to think about what actually you're getting if you're asking for help. So the unified protocol, we did this study here. It's a type of CBT. Seems like it might be helpful, at least for some people. My colleague here at Duke in our center, Andrada Nekshu, she and her team did a study using neurostimulation and cognitive reappraisal during neurostimulation. So not just passive neurostimulation, but during neurostimulation, while somebody was triggered in a controlled kind of lab setting, they got reappraisal. They were asked to reappraise how they were experiencing the trigger in real time. And that seemed to be more helpful in changing how they reacted than did the control conditions in this study. Does this mean we can go do neurostimulation for everybody? No, but it is the first study to pave the way for using neurostimulation with misophonia. So it might be, as we kind of responsibly do more research in this space, might be that we're able in a few years to do this. So again, these are new insights. They're not final. They're not final answers, but they are important insights. Number 5, another shout out to the MRF, Misophonia Research Fund. They've funded over $12 million to advance research on misophonia. And in the last year alone, what they did that's really great is they added to the money they've been giving out a new pool of money for what's called the Misophonia Data Discovery Award. This award is small compared to the other ones they give. This is a $75,000 US award for 1 to 2 years of research. The idea here is to get new researchers, new people who aren't already funded, aren't already doing the work, trying to get them to start with new ideas and get some pilot data that can lead to bigger studies later. Or it's for people like some of you who are here today as researchers who've been around in the field of misophonia for a long time. It's to get you to take some of your ideas you've not actually studied, but you think are really good ideas, and get some preliminary data to test some of your really good ideas. So shout out to these folks, again, incredibly generous, incredibly kind people who are doing all of us great work by offering this money. Okay, number 4, steps have been taken forward in the last year in understanding misophonia in kids. And it is always, to those of us who are deeply invested in this work, it is always sad and feels routinely kind of shocking that there's such little research on misophonia in kids and adolescents, given that we know it seems like that's most typically when it begins. It's sad that we don't have enough research and enough researchers trying to understand the causes of misophonia. It's sad that we don't have enough people doing research to understand how to prevent it, or once it starts, how to arrest its development. Right? All of these things are things that we could do, but we haven't been able to do it. Key reason is that there haven't been good measures for kids, validated measures for kids. The last year, several different measures emerged, and we want to highlight this one. It's the most recent one. We think this is a good one. This is a measure that clinicians can give or researchers can use to assess misophonia in youth. This can be used for screening. This can be used for assessment. And this really can help identify misophonia earlier on. And you all who are here who have kids, this is designed to help clinicians know how to tell you how severe misophonia is with your child. But we just haven't really had good measures up until now. So we think this is a big deal, and we want to see more research in this area. Number 3, we learned in the last year that misophonia is not rare. Now, there were previous preliminary studies pointing at prevalence, 12%, 15%, 20%. There's studies that have said 50%. And what I think is that those studies have all been inflated for various reasons that have to do with boring methodology things that I will definitely not bore you with. I think those things have been a bit inflated. What we got this last year are really rigorously done, population level, large studies, one in the US and one in Germany. And what they did was got representative samples of the people in these countries. So not college students, not 100 or 200 people, thousands of people representing the different demographics of the country. And what we see is that in the US, we can now say that roughly 5% of adults have clinically impairing levels of misophonia. Clinically impairing levels, so not mild symptoms like the studies that point to a 20% prevalence. Clinically impaired levels. In Germany, If you use the same threshold, it's closer to 2% of more moderate impairment. It goes up to 9.9 if you go more mild. These are big numbers. Guys, these are huge numbers. This tells us we now know misophonia seems more prevalent than anorexia, than autism, schizophrenia, OCD, borderline personality, and the list goes on and on and on. This is a really high prevalence rate. Even when we make the cut point be clinically kind of high levels of clinical impairment, it's still an enormous number of people that are suffering. So this is a big deal in my mind and our mind. I think this really paves the way for a better argument to funding sources that this is a national problem and a worldwide problem that needs to be solved. Number two is that we saw earlier, actually it was the end of, it was in August of 2023, excuse me, we saw the first celebrity with misophonia to publicly talk about how she has misophonia and what she's done to get help, and encouraging people with misophonia to get help, to seek evidence-based care. The story brought national and international attention to misophonia. Lots of celebrities have said informally here and there that they have misophonia. What Melissa Gilbert from Little House on the Prairie did is she put herself forward for a video. If you haven't seen it, it's on our YouTube. We partnered with her on this. And she essentially said to the world, I have had misophonia my whole life, and I finally got help, and I'm doing better. And I want everyone to feel hopeful and to seek out evidence-based approaches. But we want to give a huge shout out to Melissa for doing this work, for partnering with us at Duke on this work and in the partnership to come. We really appreciate you, Melissa. And I think the amount of attention that was received by this story was, it was overwhelming how much of an impact she had by talking about this so openly and so extensively. And coming in finally at number one in 2024, our belief is that misophonia being proposed formally as a new diagnosis in the ICD-11, we think that that may be the most important advancement in the last year in misophonia. And it isn't approved yet. It's being considered for approval formally by the Medical and Scientific Advisory Committee of the ICD-11. ICD-11, if you're not looking at the screen and you're listening, this is the classification system for all medical health problems everywhere in the world. It is part of the World Health Organization. Every doctor everywhere, even in the US, is using the ICD-11. Why do we choose the ICD-11? Well, we, a group of us, chose to do this, including several here, Chris and Jen, who are here. We and others, we put forward this proposal to ICD and not DSM. Why? Because our assessment is that misophonia is a global phenomenon. And the DSM is a United States document. It's not used everywhere in the world. It's actually only really used here in the US. We wanted something to be in a worldwide classification system, not be specific to the US, because misophonia is a worldwide phenomenon. That's reason enough to submit this only to the ICD. But the other reason is that we didn't think that misophonia had enough evidence to suggest it should be a psychiatric disorder specifically. So we've submitted it into the ICD-11 under a header that allows it to be a little bit more broad under signs and symptoms of the nervous system specifically, because we wanted to make sure that it's in the ICD-11. And over time, as more research comes in and tells us where it should be situated more specifically, then perhaps it could change which category it's in. So the misophonia classification is under review, and our hope is that it is approved during this calendar year. Okay, apologies again in advance if there's something that you think was a top 10 advancement and we didn't mention it. That's okay, just like you can mention it in the Zoom chat. You can email us. We'd love to hear from everybody. If you're watching this later and it's recorded and you want to know references, press pause. Here are the references. So let's talk briefly about what's next in 2025. What are we thinking we're seeing coming ahead? And we're going to start with just a couple of things we know we're working on that we want to share with you all. We have some support now from the Brout family for advocacy and awareness. I mentioned that earlier. And so in 2025, we're going to offer education and resources to every family physician and pediatrician practice organization in the US. Every single one. I mean, we're already after that. Grace has been working in an incredibly diligent way to achieve this. Our vision is that when you take your kid to your family, to your pediatrician, or when you go yourself to a family doc, that they've heard of misophonia. They know what it is, and they know how to resource you. But we want to move the needle on that. We know that's ambitious, but we are working hard to do that. The other way we're going to do that is by attending select conferences and hosting webinars to educate clinicians. We have one coming up in a few weeks with the American Counseling Association, where I'm presenting to counselors at a very large scale level about misophonia to educate them. And there's a number of others like that we are doing and that others are doing. We, through CMER, are really dedicated to this. We've started to partner with a new advocacy group called Teens for Education and Advocacy on Misophonia, TEAM, and we are planning a summer research workshop for teens, for high school students in particular, who want to get involved in misophonia research but can't. And we want to kind of plant seeds for them for the future to be leaders in this space by offering an educational workshop series. We're going to continue validating families as we do by talking to them about how we can help resource them with evidence-based guidance. And we're planning to co-host the 3rd annual Care Day to continue helping to ensure that everybody understands the current state of what's going on in the world of misophonia research. And our research studies this next year, we are beginning a bunch of new research projects. Without getting into great detail on all of them, here's just sort of a list. We've got several lived experience studies where we're trying to understand the lived experience better and report out to the world what that looks like. We have a longitudinal study that we're partnering with Dr. Carpenter at Duke on, looking at childhood predictors of later misophonia in a developmental longitudinal way from early preschool to ages 16 to 22. We have a semantic filtering headphones project we started with the University of Washington to help filter out certain semantically categorized sounds like eating, chewing, crunching. The idea is you would tell the app what you want to filter out. You'd have headphones on and you'd hear everything around you except those sounds. And it would be part of a broader suite of coping strategies. Just beginning to start that research. We're translating our Duke Misophonia questionnaire into Mandarin. We have a large misophonia in China study that is about to launch. We're looking at misophonia awareness among healthcare providers in various different disciplines to try to raise awareness through research there. We're looking at biopsychosocial processes, as we've talked about today, which ones are most important for treatment. And the way we think about that is, as psychologists, we are building a psychotherapy that is really individualized, that focuses on processes, biopsychosocial processes, for each person in a really organized way that's very flexible. We're just calling that process-based therapy. For now, we plan to do a clinical trial. We have the map on the right side of the screen, which just gives you a visual of all of the different collaborations in the world that we're engaged with, and we will continue to engage in all of those collaborations. Huge shout out to a couple of the faculty here at Duke and our CMER group. Dr. Moskovich has been funded to start by the MRF to start a new study, which will look at the prevalence of misophonia and over time, the incidence of misophonia in the US in a nationally representative sample. This will be the first study to see what changes over time over the course of a year in a large representative sample. Dr. Nekshu, our neuroimaging and neurostimulation whiz here, she has and her team have a grant through the MRF to follow up on the research they did on neurostimulation to try to understand a little bit more clinically how can we use neurostimulation to change how people regulate their emotions with misophonia. So these studies are going to continue to move along, and I don't know that they'll be done by the end of 2025, but they will be in midstream and maybe finished in 2026. Again, if you're somebody who's interested in supporting any or all of this, just reach out to us in all the ways I said earlier. If you're somebody who's interested in supporting our team financially, this is a long link here, but you can go to, basically you can just go to our Misophonia website, top right corner, click on the give button, type in misophonia, and that money will support us. So a year from now, what do we hope? Big picture, we're hoping some of what happens is that a year from now, we can say misophonia is approved worldwide as a diagnosis. We hope that new treatment studies are finally published, and we have more information about how to help people. We hope that new lived experience studies tell us with more granularity about the lived experience of people with misophonia. We hope that there's larger and more rigorous studies exploring the brain. There are some studies looking at the brains of people. We know that. None of those studies are very large. None are conclusive. And none have control groups that tell us what's unique to misophonia. That's important. So we're hoping that we'll see some brain-based studies that can tell us a little bit more specifically what is uniquely related to misophonia and what is not. And then last but not least, we hope we see even greater awareness, much more advocacy, more funding for science, more funding for advocacy, more activity, more engagement to help all of us help solve this problem. That was a lot of Zach talking. In my household, sometimes the joke here would be TMZ, which means too much Zach. So I apologize. This is what my wife would say. She'd be like, "Hey, TMZ, TMZ." I'm going to be quiet. And Jen and Chris, you guys can take it from here.